Our next presenter is living in interconnected world, as they tell me, because he is, among other things, an e-resident of Estonia. Fantastic. You know, you can enjoy our lovely country from abroad, minus the weather. That's a good thing, I guess. But also an active initiator in the community and the founder of OWASP chapter in Estonia. Sounds very fancy. He's going to tell us all about it. Please welcome Mr. Stefano Amorelli.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I'm very excited to be here with you. As a matter of fact, it's my first time here in Bsides, Tallinn. And I want to do something very fun with you before we start our talk. I want to celebrate with you. So the first thing I want to do is to ask everybody to take out your credit card from your pocket. I will do the same. I'm not messing, guys. Please, go ahead. So this is my credit card. And the next thing I would like to ask is to also take out your phone as well. What we're going to do is we're going to scan this QR code. And some lucky members of the audience will see this fantastic page. So you actually won this prize. You can put your credit card information and redeem your prize. Clearly, I'm messing with you. But millions of people still fell for this scam today. But that's not the only way how hackers pay with our money. And that's what our talk is about today. As a matter of fact, I would like to start with this question, and this will remain an open question until the end. I want everybody to stay tuned and try to guess the best answer. And the question is, how hackers pay with your money? There are many ways. But the correct answer is what is the most efficient way on how they do that. But before we get started, quick introduction about myself. I help startups and companies in highly regulated industries, such as payment industry, as both software engineering and cybersecurity lead. I'm also an e-resident and e-residency community leader, and I run the first OWASP chapter here in Estonia. And by the way, we will also have a very cool workshop later for OWASP Top 10 on large language models, so feel free to join us. It's going to be very fun. But without further ado, let's move forward with our presentation. And it's a presentation divided into three parts. First part, we're going to analyze a little bit the technology behind payment cards, how they work, generally speaking. The second part is about cashing in, how hackers actually commit card fraud. And the third part is a case study. I want to share some lessons with you from my latest project implementing a payment card solution on board of airlines, the biggest airlines in the world. So without further ado, let's start with technology. First of all, we need to understand how card authorizations work. Now, there are multiple processes whenever we pay with a card. But for the sake of this presentation, we are going to focus on the first one, the card authorization. How does it work on a very general level? We present our card to a POS device, and this card then gets read by the device, or we can also have a web portal. This information gets transmitted into a credit card processor. What is a credit card processor? Usually there are companies that facilitate the transmission of data to the card networks, such as Visa and MasterCard. And this information then gets transmitted to the issuing bank. What is the issuing bank? Is the bank that issued the card. At this stage here, there is some verification process, and if the transaction is actually validated, authenticated, then we get the result back in the pipeline, and we get transaction succeeded or transaction failed. Well, let's move forward. So, as you probably know, with this card, we have many different ways of paying. So here I have a POS device. The first way would be to swipe it, right? This is not very common in Europe. I don't remember the last time I did it, but this is very common in other parts of the world, as we will see. The second type of transactions, how we can pay with this card, is EMV transactions. EMV transactions stands for Eurocard, MasterCard, and Visa. And there are two main ways to pay. One is dip it, so chip and pin, and one is tap it. Okay? The last type of transactions, well, imagine I don't have the card, I'm at home, I can still pay. These transactions are called card not present, or CNP. Let's begin with the technology behind magstripe. This is the oldest technology, was introduced in 1960s, 1969 by MasterCard to be precise, and this is a very old technology. Basically, how does it work? In the back of your card, you can see this magnetic stripe that contains in plain text the binary data of your card. Now, obviously, as you can see here, obviously, this poses a huge threat because this information can be easily copied and easily cloned in another card. And usually what attackers do, they use some devices called skimmers. We will see them in a little bit. And they copy this information and they sell it or clone in another physical card. Very old technology, very vulnerable. But then what is EMV? As we said, this is a new technology developed by Europay, MasterCard, and Visa, and is based on the chip that you see on your card. Now, this little shiny thing is pretty magical because it's a microcomputer in itself. It contains a processor, memory, storage, and algorithm. It runs algorithms. So the way that EMV transactions work are pretty different from the way magstripe transactions work. So let's see what's the difference. In magstripe transactions, the POS device just creates a payment request, reads the data, and encrypts it, and sends it to the issuing bank. Okay, nothing crazy there, pretty simple, pretty vulnerable. In EMV transactions, the thing is different, because whenever we create a payment request, we send it to the EMV card, the microcomputer, and the microcomputer contains a secret. This secret never leaves the card. But what it does, it encrypts the payment request with this secret that only the issuing bank knows. So this information gets transmitted back to the POS. The POS doesn't know nothing about it, but gets validated only at the issuing bank end. Obviously, this is a much more secure approach, and is considered the safest modern way to pay with physical cards. Why? Well, it's physical tamper resistant. We cannot easily clone chip cards. There haven't been any case where there was a cloned chip, as a matter of fact. And it's based on a command and response protocol rather than just reading static data. Obviously, there are still threats to these transactions. The main threat is that the POS devices can be tricked into thinking that the chip is damaged, for example, and then fall back into unsafe methods, such as swiping. And then again, the link between the POS device and the card become the weakest segment. But what about card-not-present transactions? How we can protect them? Well, recently, a few years ago, we have a new system, especially in Europe, with the PSD2 directive that requires merchants to implement strong customer authentication. What does it mean? Whenever you pay online, usually you get multi-factor authentication that's usually a SMS code. And the same concept is implemented independently by Visa and MasterCard in US, where there is no PSD2, like in Europe, but works exactly the same way. Still some threats there, so we have seen a lot of SIM swapping recently. but also they are vulnerable to social engineering techniques. Many in the middle, not so much, but the biggest threat is that not all merchants switched to have implemented this technology, especially in US. But let's talk about regulation. So let's imagine we are building a system that handles credit card information, either as software engineers or cybersecurity professionals, how we can protect the data. The answer is PCI DSS. So who knows PCI DSS? Raise your hand. We already have some. Cool. And it's considered, of course, the golden standard for payment card industry and stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. This is something that is required for any organization that handles, transmits, or stores cardholder data. But what is it exactly? It is a set of security standards and guidelines and rules, and there are 12 requirements and more than 300 sub-requirements in the current version. It's a lot, and it's considered one of the most challenging certifications to get as a company. And by the way, I also want to say that this is not a legal requirement. So it's not required by law to be PCI compliant, but it's usually a contractual requirement by your bank. The question is always, if fraud happens, who is going to pay? So if you are PCI compliant, you have your shoulder backed a little bit. It's a very huge process of getting PCI certified, but I wanted to still share with you 3 main areas that PCI covers. And the first one is protect cardholder data. That's, I think, the main differentiator with other standards, such as ISO, for example. And the second one, build and maintain a secure network and maintain a vulnerability management program. But let's go to the fun part, so cashing in, how hackers actually commit payment card fraud. And I would like to start with these statistics from the European Central Bank. As you can see in yellow, the majority of fraud is committed for card-not-present transactions, 84% on average. That makes sense, because of course we don't have the same kind of protection we have in physical card transactions. But I have now a question for you. We saw what happens in Europe, but let's see what happens all over the world. So I would love you to scan this QR code, and you can vote the country where most fraud happens. So please go ahead, and let's see what the audience says. The answers will be in real time, so I'm very curious to see what you guys think. The first option is United States, then we have Italy, Sicily, where I'm coming from. Then we also have France, Nigeria, Switzerland, and China. We already have some votes. Oh. Okay, 35 people. Let's see if we can get to 40 at least. Okay, we got 40. 43. Cool. Okay, so the vast majority says US, but we also have somebody thinking of China. Nigeria is the third spot. I think it's enough. And the right answer is US. Obviously. Why? Why is the reason? There are many reasons. And one of those is that swiping is still pretty popular in the United States. As we saw, magstripe is a very old technology, but it's still pretty used. And MasterCard, the first that implemented magstripe, is actually dropping it. By 2029, there will be no MasterCard having magstripe. And it's dropping first in Europe because it's not very well used here, and then in US from 2027. But already next year, it's starting to drop magstripe in Europe. That's pretty interesting, in my opinion. But let's see a step-by-step guide how hackers still commit payment card fraud. And the first step is to steal card data. And there are different ways how they can steal card data. Maybe somebody wants to raise their hand and try to guess what could be one method. Nobody? Yes? Scream? Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's another one. Yeah, I didn't think of it. Yeah. Somebody else? Stealing? Yeah, yeah, that could be another option. But we got some interesting answers. Exactly. That's a very interesting one. But the first one in the slides is phishing. So the one that I showed, the first page, is one example. Then we have malware. Hackers can use malware to steal your credit card information, data breaches, and then we also have card skimming. And card skimming is done by using these devices, these little toys that are invisible. They're usually installed in ATM machines or POS devices. You don't see them, but they copy the data. Now, this is very old school, but it's still pretty used in the United States. As a matter of fact, the second step is then, now that we have the data, how we make profit out of it, how hackers make profit. Sell it is the answer. And just for your information, last year, the price of stolen card data plus fools, what does it mean, fools? Is the full package of personal details, your name, your address, everything about you, is on average for $25.36 on the dark web. It's pretty cheap, considering that also the criminals pay 1/3 of a cent for $1 of credit on the card. So a pretty huge profitable business and pretty big ROI. The third step, as I said, usually hackers steal the data, they sell it, and they already made a profit, so they are out of the way. But then there are people who buy the data, and they have to use it somehow. And usually these people are not the same, because the longest is the pipeline, the longer is the pipeline, the more difficult it is for investigator to find the first criminals, and in general it's easier to get away with it. So the criminals who buy stolen card data then can clone it on physical cards and swipe it, or buy stuff online. And usually the preferred goods are gift cards or crypto that are highly untraceable. Just for your reference, approximately 60 million stolen cards data was on sale on the dark web last year. And in this screenshot, maybe somebody know it, but this is a forum called the Russian Market, pretty famous on the dark web for carding. This is a huge number. It means that more than 60 million people were stolen their credit card information. But let's go in the last part of our talk. It's a case study. I will share with you some lessons that I learned when implementing a payment card solution on board of airlines. Now, this is an extremely difficult situation because we had to handle offline authorization. We don't have internet on board of most flights, but I will not cover that aspect. Maybe it can be a good topic for another talk. I will speak a little bit more on the general aspects of creating a PCI compliant solution from scratch. So this is me on the first flight where we tested the application in Iceland, but the app is now used on the biggest airlines in US. Lesson number 1, divide et impera, the PCI way. So I'm pretty sure everybody or most of you knows the concept of divide et impera, but this concept is extremely important, especially if we are handling sensitive data. It's based on the principle of modularization and top-down design approach. What does it mean? Usually, when we create a PCI solution, not all of our system needs to be PCI compliant. We might have an e-commerce page, we might have an orders page, discounts page, whatever, but only a small part of it handles with cardholder data. And that's why it's important to understand that not everything needs to be PCI compliant. Why? Well, we would have a much faster compliance process this way, and we would have a system that is easier to protect, if we are talking about the PCI module. Okay, that sounds cool and everything, but how we actually do that? The first thing is to isolate environments. So what we usually call a PCI environment or CDE environment, cardholder data environment, needs to be separated completely from the rest of our system. And in a way, we black box the applications, but the system's environments as a whole. That also means, of course, that we need to implement strong role-based access controls, and identity access management plays a vital role there. In my professional experience, the PCI and CDE environment were completely different. They didn't know any implementation details one of each other. Another important aspect is data minimization. And this is something that is specific to PCI. And what it means is that we need to minimize the amount of data that we store for the little time as possible. So whenever we process a transaction, there is no reason why we should keep the data stored in our database. That's the concept of data minimization. Is pretty recurring in the PCI compliance process. The last thing, of course, encryption is extremely important at rest and in transit. So whenever we communicate between different environments, we have to keep into consideration that everything needs to be strongly encrypted. Let's move forward to the second lesson. This is a very cool concept. I love it. It's called the best code written is the one you don't write. And it's based on a principle called YAGNI. You ain't gonna need it. So this concept applies in every software engineering, every system existing on Earth, but especially in PCI environments. We need to write the less code. We need to use the less dependency possible. Why? Because that way we would have a system easier to maintain, to protect, to scale, and to comply. It's also based on another software engineering principle called KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And based on that, I have another question for all of you. So please scan the QR code and answer again to this question that asks, which backend would you prefer to protect? And we have a Go plus serverless, that's the first option. Then we have COBOL monolith. Who knows COBOL, by the way? Raise your hand. OK. And then we have .NET plus Kubernetes. So I'm very curious. And by the way, this answer is very subjective. There is no right or wrong. I have my personal preference, but I'm very curious about what you think. So let's see if we can get to maybe 50 people this time. The majority is saying Go plus serverless, which is very interesting. But the second spot is COBOL monolith, which is even more interesting to me. OK, 10 more people. We have still a lot of time, actually. Maybe somebody else wants to try. OK, so let's see. As I said, there is no right or wrong answer to this. My personal preference would be to use a serverless approach. So my answer to that would be using Go plus serverless. And maybe somebody who answered COBOL monolith can raise their hand and explain with one line why. Please. That's a good one. As a matter of fact, COBOL, by the way, is something that was used by banks in 1980s. It's a very old language, but many systems still rely on that programming language. And as a matter of fact, most people who build these systems, they are either retired or dead. So the people who actually can code COBOL, they are very high paid right now. And nobody knows what is it. So going back to our speech, how we write the least code possible, I've seen a serverless approach to be extremely efficient in that way. I've seen PCI compliant solutions running on just a few serverless functions, either on AWS or Firebase cloud functions. And why this is important is we are delegating a lot of vulnerability management, patch management, keeping everything updated and monitored to providers that we know they are safe, they are PCI compliant. Amazon is PCI compliant, Google is as well. So it's a lot of stuff we are delegating, and that provides a huge benefit in our case. Another thing, we talked about backend, but another thing would be using cross-platform technologies on the client side. Because remember, PCI is not only about backend, it's also about client. And in the app I made, the client side was also extremely important because we would store the data locally on the phone devices before actually syncing it when there was internet. And in that sense, client side, we can use some cross-platform technologies. Flutter, React Native are very good options in that regard. Now, a lot of people, I heard, they were a little bit hesitant to use React Native, for example, or Flutter for such high-sensitive data and systems. But the reality is that nowadays, these technologies, they are pretty advanced. And for example, Flutter is used by Google Pay, by MasterCard as well for some products. So they are stable enough in this day and age. Last thing, reduce dependencies. Whenever we introduce a dependency, whether it's a package, whether it's another system, third-party system, plugin, whatever, we need to make sure that it's PCI compliant. That adds a lot of troubles. Let's go to the last question, to the last lesson. That is, ticking boxes is both compliant and dangerous. So this concept I always tell to my team members and clients is extremely important. What does it mean is that whenever we comply, we get certified, either PCI, ISO, whatever, this is just the beginning of our mission. Oftentimes, I see certification and compliance as the end goal, the end result. Oh, I got certified, now I'm safe. But this is just a ticking box exercises. PCI compliant, as a matter of fact, is just a bunch of documentation. It's a lot of documentation. The idea is that we need not just to comply, but embrace the standard. We have to follow the rules on an ongoing basis. In general, not just PCI, standards can be good as guidelines, but getting certified is only the first step, is the beginning. That's why ticking boxes is compliant, but also extremely dangerous. So then what to do? This is a question that would require another talk on itself, but really summarized, the holistic approach to security here is important. So we have to understand that there is no thing as a secure system, but there could be a security-oriented organization. An organization where teams are security trained and aware of the threats. I'm talking to you, most cybersecurity professionals, but it's important that everybody in the organization has a basic understanding of what we are talking about, either software engineers, but also management and non-technical stakeholders. In general, it's not a requirement at all for PCI DSS, but I'm a huge believer in security operation centers, so that's something I always suggest also for my smallest clients, to have a small in-house security operations center. That could be also like 5 people. That really helps establishing a good cybersecurity posture within the organization. So to recap, let's see the lessons that we learned, that I learned and I shared with you. And the first one was divide et impera, the PCI way. As I said, extremely important, especially in this situation, to scope down the PCI compliant module. The second lesson is the best code written is the one you don't write. So let's write as less as possible. Let's have as less infrastructure as possible, because that would allow us to sleep better if we need to be PCI compliant. And the third lesson is that ticking boxes is both compliant and dangerous. So standards are very good. They are there to guide us, but then it's our responsibility to actually implement them on a day-to-day basis. Guys, there is a lot to do for all the people in this room, and payment card fraud is huge. In the 10-year forecast just in US is 175 billion. That's a huge number. And it's pretty interesting that cards have been around for several years, but still we are facing a lot of fraud, even if declining, is still there. So as our dear friend Kevin Mitnick said, hacking is a big business. Hackers are making huge profit out of the data. It's not more about curiosity. So let's go back to our first question. How hackers pay with your money? So we saw already the pipeline, how they commit fraud. But then we can tweak this question a little bit then and make it as how hackers can steal the most card data. What is the most efficient way they do that? And with least effort, they maximize their profit. Maybe somebody wants to try to answer this question. Please. Say it again, sorry? I cannot.
I mean hotels and merchants, but mostly hotels.
Yes, but okay, that's the victims, let's say, of the attacks. That's correct, by the way. But the question is more, we saw how they can steal the data, different methods. Which one do you think is the most efficient way for hackers? Phishing, okay, we have some guess. Maybe somebody else want to guess?
I would say malware.
Malware, okay. Data breaches. Okay, I like it, but the right answer is data breaches. And obviously, if we target a system, a database that contains a lot of users' data with one single vulnerability, hackers can access to millions of users' data. And that's what happened in 2019 with a huge data breach of Capital One. That, by the way, is a very PCI-compliant bank in US. And through a vulnerability on AWS, the attacker exposed more than 100 million credit card information and fools, so all the personal details. That's pretty worrying, because also all these people, all the victims, they couldn't do anything about it, right? It's not about phishing, for example. You can educate users to not fall for these scams. But in this case, the victims, they just woke up one day and they discovered that their data was on sale, maybe, on the dark web. But that means that everybody in this room, as a cybersecurity professional, it's our responsibility to protect our users' data and to spread awareness inside our teams, but also outside for our users. So this is a sentence I really like. I love it. I always repeat it to my team members. In data we guard, in awareness we lead. And with this, I would like to end my speech today. Thank you very much. And by the way, we only had 30 minutes, but we covered a lot. So for those who are more interested about technical details, specifications, whether it's EMV, PCI, I put this a repository where you can find a lot more information. So feel free to check it out.
So, any more questions? Now you can ask, and he will have to answer. Okie dokie.
I will be around anyways, so if somebody wants to ask later.
Oh yes, there is a question.
If USA is such a technology country, why they go a bit behind the contactless methods in payment?
I couldn't hear very well.
If USA is a really technological country, why they are a bit against or refuse to use the contactless or the more new technologies in payment?
Mm-hmm. So you're saying why they are still using Magstripe, right? Yeah. That's a very good question. And there is no objective way to answer that. I can give you my opinion. In US, there is a tradition of using swipes, of swiping the card. So switching from a legacy system to something new is always something difficult for the users. I was in US last year, and what happens if you go to most restaurants, you just hand out the card, the waiter takes the card, takes it in the back of the restaurant, swipes it, and then brings you the receipt. Now, obviously, this is extremely unsafe because the waiter can copy it in the best case scenario, or there could be a skimmer in the POS device. But it's something that people are used to. And originally, I will also add this, swiping was the fastest way to pay. So that's why a PIN was, there was a huge resistance for using PIN in US because it could slow down the sales from a business perspective. So it was in a way cheaper to accept a credit fraud risk rather than asking PIN every time, paradoxically, you know. But now, for example, with Apple Pay, the thing is changing, and as I said, MasterCard is dropping out completely. So we are going in a direction where users are forced and merchants are forced to go away from old vulnerable technology such as Magstripe.
Oh, lovely. Now it's getting academical. We have a comment over there.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. Just a tidbit to share. One Estonian company, quite a big one, an early adopter of PCI DSS standard, had to do mobile card payments. And they figured out that they can actually do it over DNS queries, the domain name system. And it worked. It was audited for years. And the company had PCI card payments working over DNS. So that if anybody says that, hey, PCI DNS is forcing you to do something or preventing you from doing something, it is actually quite a flexible standard that you can use.
Yes.
So any stories that you may have about like strange solutions would be interesting to hear, if we still have time.
Yes, no, obviously. So the question is about considering PCI as a broad standard or like offline authorizations.
The standard is the same. Just my point is that you can sort of be compliant to the standard with very, very different solutions. Some which may be quite queer. Yeah,
and I totally agree with you. As a matter of fact, as I said, PCI is a lot of documentation. As every cybersecurity certification, you can probably get away with it, even though if you're not 100% implementing the PCI guidelines. And that's why, because we can get certified, we can get compliant, but then if something happens, there will be investigations and we might still find ourselves absorbing some of the fraud risk. And another thing I want to mention is that in that respective, maybe PCI certification is indeed important, but it's not as important as having the secure system. And secure system doesn't exist, but security-oriented organization exists. So what I mean to say is that the damage and the stolen volume it's one digit. But we also have to consider the reputational damage for our company. It's not only people who are losing money, it's people who are losing trust in our company. So I totally agree with you. Maybe it can be way too easier to get away with PCI certification. But that's also why I wanted to talk with you and explain that the certification is only one thing, then doing the right stuff is another thing. So in that perspective, I agree with you.
So any more comments, suggestions?
Please.
Yes, please.
Question about contactless card payments.
Mm-hmm.
Question about contactless card payments. Are there also known security issues? Because I suspect that some remote amplification of my card, is there some time delays or etc.?
That's a very good question. So contactless transactions, so we're talking about tapping the card, are based on EMV. So they use the exact same protocols we're talking about. It's just they don't have the physical contact with the POS reader. There are some vulnerabilities there. So I suggest you to check out the QR code, but everything that has been studied, always been some security researcher that in theory they could attack especially NFC transactions, but we never saw anything really widespread on the wild. So there might be something, but nothing has been exploited on a large scale yet. But for sure, it's it's something that could change in the future. But right now, EMV transactions, they work exactly the same whether you're tapping or dipping the card. They're considered the safest option. Based on the concept I said, there is this secret inside the card that never gets shared, also when tapping the card. But we are always looking for vulnerabilities and way to improve that as well. But right now, we should be safe.
Well, that's a happy note to finish on, I guess. I will continue tapping my phone everywhere. And again, not much money to be lost. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.